Hello and welcome to another episode of ABI Labs. So far in Series 3 we've been focusing on how we can use the BoardMaster and more specifically the analog IC tester module to test analog components in circuit. In the previous episode we looked at how we can use the pen probes to test a discrete component, and in this episode we will be looking at how we can test analog ICs in circuit. So Oliver, I've noticed that you have a PPS module. Why do we have this here?
Yes, of course. So because we're doing power on tests for analog ICs, we want to test the functionality of those devices and of course have to power those devices. So we'll be using the PPS, which is a power supply available with the BoardMaster. This power supply has 120 watts maximum and 300 volts peak to ground. It's also got 3 independent channels and 3 remote sensors with 1 ground and 3 commons.
I believe you can wire the channels either in series or parallel.
Yes, so to maximise either your voltage or current, you can wire them in series or parallel.
So now that we've covered the PPS, our power supply, and we have it's all connected to our PCB, how do we then go about testing an IC, an analog IC in circuit?
Okay, so as you mentioned, we've powered up. We need power from the PPS. We've got a clip from the AICT, and now the AICT tester will then test the device, whatever we choose from the library. We have a library of analog devices. If it's a comparator or an op-amp, comparator will test just linear, op-amp it will test linear and saturation. If it's a transistor, it will do a gain test or a HFE. If it's a diode, it'll do a forward or reverse voltage. And if it's an optocoupler, it'll do a RTC. So in this test, I'll be testing an LM324 quad amplifier. I'll open our tester and I'll search our library for an LM324. We'll get some statistics about the device. So in this case, quad operational amplifier. I've got it on the device, I've got my power supply, so I need to apply power with our PPS. I'll turn on channel 1 in this case, and I'll start the test. Like before, it's done a connections, functional and voltage test, so it checks that all the connections are wired correctly, and then it'll proceed to do, in this case, a linear and saturation test for the quad amplifier, and then it'll do a voltage test after that. Okay, in this case, our amplifier is working perfectly, so I'll move on to our next device.
So Oliver, you've demonstrated on the LM324, which is a quad operation amplifier, and you've explained how depending on the device we are testing, the system uses a different test technique to make sure our component, our device is functioning as it should be. How about testing a comparator? How will that work?
So with a comparator, the system will do a linear test. I can demonstrate that for you with our LM339. I'll move to our next test flow. As the next step in the test flow, I'll power off the board. I'll open up the analog IC tester instrument. Make sure that I move from that device to our new device, which is a quad differential comparator. I'll search for it in our library. Select the device, open up our power supply, power on channel 1, and then I can start the test. It'll then do a connections, functional and voltage test as it's been doing before.
I'm always amazed by how quick the BoardMaster can carry out a functional test on an IC.
Yeah, it's very quick. We did have a customer in the US, a multinational aerospace business, that took them 3 days, their engineers 3 days, to then test devices like we're testing now. So it's a fraction of the time.
With the BoardMaster, has gone down from 3 days just to 3 seconds.
Exactly.
That's great. So in next week's episode, we will be looking at how we can use the MIS4, the multiple instrument station, to carry out multiple different types of tests on our PCBs.